So for a few of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Kennedy. I grew up here in Columbia on a farm my great-grandfather bought east of town in Glendale. When I was growing up, my great-uncle ran it as a conventional beef cattle operation. I grew up working for him and hunting and fishing with my dad and all of our friends here, and developed a real love for the land. But no one really encouraged me to come back to it because there's not really a future in it, or so most people thought. So I went off to college, University of North Carolina, got a business degree there, and I did ROTC. As soon as I graduated, I was heading to the ship. I did 4 years in the Navy on the frigate Halliburton and saw pretty much all of the world except for Asia. Didn't make it there. But while I was out to sea, my dad sent me some books by some farmers who were looking at things in different ways. And reading those guys' work, and I'm going to talk about them tonight, Joel Salatin is one and Alan Savory is the other, sort of inspired me to come back to the land and give it a second go. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. All right, so thank you for having me. All right, so the title of, Robin asked for me for a title, and I gave her this one, How Cows Can Save the Planet. It's pretty ambitious, and I probably should have titled it something using the word soil, but I wanted you to actually come tonight, so I stuck that up there. And I got to give credit, and if you haven't tried the land, please do. And there's also a suggested reading list of a bunch more authors and farmers and environmentalists who have gotten these ideas from. So if you want to check out my sources or do more research on your own, please pick up the reading list. Our lady named Judith Swartz wrote a book called Cows Save the Planet and Other Improbable Ways of Returning Soil Health. But as unlikely as it sounds, I will actually get around to explaining a theory of how cows may help save the planet through their impact on the soil. But first, let me set the framework for discussion. So the first guy I mentioned, Alan Savory, he did a TED Talk, I think it was towards the end of last year, and it's had over a couple of million views. So I'm going to basically summarize his TED Talk. So everything for the first half is Savory's work. And we're going to touch on a bunch of things, and then I'm going to bring it home to talk about how Savory's work happens here in Murray County. All right, so here they are, the world's problems. I had to define what exactly the cows are saving us from before we could get into that. So this is the general mix of what you hear about in the news today and pretty much throughout history, right? It's all, well, except for the new part, the climate change part, but the other stuff has been there for a while. I don't know if you've ever sat up late with friends and tried to solve the world's problems. Ever thought about it? It gets squishy, you have this one thing you want to fix and realize you've got to fix this first before you can fix that, and so on. But I guess the point of that is that they're all connected, right? And I'm going to look at it through my lens, which most people sort of look at it through their own lens, but it all comes back to the soil, all these issues. All right, so the first one. This is a graph of CO2, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere for the past 450,000 years. You can see on the far right, this has been up and down, it's been up and down, and here we are in 2013 going way up. Most people think that it's because of our industrial use of fossil fuels, and that's a major part of it, but just as much, if not more, is the way we farmed for thousands of years. When we plow, we release CO2. When we burn, we release CO2. And why this is important is it's called the Goldilocks effect. Too little CO2 and we get an ice age, because that's what keeps the earth warm. Too much and we get too hot, and I guess that's part of the problem, is we don't know what's going to happen now. We've never been here before. Population growth. So right now we're sitting at about 7.2 billion, and by 2050 we're pushing towards 10 billion. And then according to the UN FAO, UN Food Organization, our farmers will have to increase productivity by 70% to meet those population demands. And that's on existing farmland, it doesn't count what we're going to destroy in the meantime. Desertification. So, in the words of Savory, desertification is just a fancy word for land that is turning into desert. Have you ever wondered, in our Bible classes, we used to talk about the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization. Why is it now all desert and a bunch of unhappy, warring, hungry people? Or maybe in your Western Civ class, the North Africa, which used to be the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Why is it now desert and a bunch of unhappy, warring people? Okay, so the answer is our agricultural practices. Either the plow or overgrazing has created these deserts, and it's getting worse. You can see all the areas in gray are already desert. The areas in yellow and red are turning into desert, and it's roughly 2/3 of the world's landmass. All right, so we have this perfect storm, right? The future does not look good from an environmental standpoint. All these kind of factors combine for a generally pissed off, hot, overpopulated world. And the sad thing is nothing that we're talking about now takes it back. All the stuff that reducing carbon emissions, it's all stuff that we have to do, but it's technology based, and none of it will take that legacy load of carbon out of the air and put it back into the ground until Savory comes along. So Alan Savory is a wildlife biologist and grew up in Rhodesia when it was still Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe and a couple other places. And he grew up, same as a lot of people around here, grew up loving the land. And he was trying to figure out, and he noticed, because he was out in the bush all the time, he noticed this desertification happening. And he was trying to figure out why. And he wrote this book, which is what I pretty much base my farming practices on. But what he discovered in his work was that the animals need the land or the grass, and the grass need the animals. All these areas were turning to desert because of either the lack of the natural animals that were there or the way we were grazing our domestic stock. And I'll explain this. All right, so the key thing he discovered was animal impact. Imagine the herds of buffalo in the American West when we first got there. If you read accounts, they're 12 miles wide, 12 miles long, 5 miles wide of solid buffalo. And they're moving through this prairie environment. And what made them do that are predators. So in all these grassland environments, the herbivores have to bunch up to get protection from predators. Once they bunch up, all their manure and spit and whatever, and they're trampling the grass, all that is concentrated in one area, so it affects the nutrient cycle of the land being able to regenerate. And because of that, they always have to stay moving. So they don't overgraze, the predators keep them moving, they exercise the soil. They hit spots really hard, and then they keep going and they don't come back till the next season. And then in nature, there's always other animals following the buffalo. There's our last buffalo left in the U.S., and antelopes and deer, and they do perform a different function in the ecosystem. They eat different things and so on. And then there's usually birds following them, and they eat out parasites and spread the manure and do their function. So, conventional wisdom has held that the primary cause of desertification is, to start with, in the grasslands, is overgrazing. And that's absolutely true the way we've been doing it. It also holds that livestock are one of the primary contributors of greenhouse gas, which is also true the way we've been doing it. Sort of a feedlot-based system, and they include the data from growing corn and all this stuff. But in the words of Savory, we were once just as sure that the world was flat. We were wrong then, and we were wrong again with regards to the use of livestock. There is one, and I repeat, only one option for reversing desertification, and that is using livestock as a proxy, mimicking the movement of large herds in nature. And that's a picture of livestock being moved in a similar pattern of the buffalo herd. Furthermore, Savory goes on to say that if we farm this way on just 1/2 of the world's grasslands, we can reduce CO2 levels in the atmosphere to pre-industrial levels, while at the same time feeding people. And he makes this point in his speech, but I mean, I can't imagine too many things that offer that much hope to the world right now, if he can make it work. So, I mean, is this really possible? And Savory has his critics, but I'm going to show you how it's worked for him and how it's working for me. So this is a ranch, Ian Mitchell Innes, in South Africa. That's roughly a mob of 2,500 head. He farms 14,000 hectares, which is 2.5 acres to a hectare, so you can do the math. But he's now running, he has quadrupled his stocking rate. So for you non-farmers out there, that means he's making 4 times the money on the same amount of land. Farming, mimicking nature. All right, now this is some of Savory's work. This is in Date Creek, Arizona. Same day, different properties on the same creek, same climate, same day or whatever. The one on the left, conventionally managed. The one on the right, holistically managed using planned grazing. This is another one in Wyoming. Again, the one on the left, managed with holistic planned grazing. The one on the right, conventionally managed. And this one also has a 150% increase in stocking rate. This one is in Carrigas Fontaine Ranch in Aberdeen, South Africa. And this is the best. I mean, when you get the fence row comparison, desert, grasslands. And these are all pictures from either Holistic Management International or the Savory Institute. This one's in Mexico, and mark the arrow, you see the hill there. Severely degraded land. You see the usual picture of livestock eating the last of what's left, and this is what it looks like now. You can see the arrow of the same hill. This is the Sonora in Mexico. Same day, adjacent ranch, different management. Just look at the abundance there. And here's the key point of this picture is the people are still on the land. My sister was involved in quite a bit of conservation work in Mexico also, and she went to visit some of these holistically managed ranches while she was there, and you had to fly into them. They were private, and she said it would just be amazing. There was desert, desert, desert. All of a sudden there's this big block of green, and that's where they were going. So here we are back to old Wendell. And Wendell Berry, if you don't know him, he's a Kentucky farmer, philosopher, poet, novelist, great storyteller. Some of his books are on my list. I highly recommend reading him. But through my lens, all these things, climate change, desertification, they're all a symptom of the same issue. And it all boils down to mankind's relationship with the soil. I'll explain this, I mean that in a literal way, but also as sort of a metaphor for our relationship as a whole with the broader resources, natural resources that support us, as well as the Creator who gave them all to us in the first place. So, where have we gone wrong, I guess? Another one of my farming inspirations, Joel Salatin, says, "Never in all of history has mankind been so disconnected from its ecological umbilical." So it's all connected, and that's all cool. But how do you get to Murray County from here? So all this pie in the sky stuff, I don't have time to think about that. I'm doing my daily to-do list. What am I going to do about it anyways? And it's depressing to think about, but got to do a little biology lesson so you fully sort of understand this. And in holistic management, you watch these ecosystem processes in the nature, there's all kinds of cycles. So it's these 4 in addition to the carbon cycle. Carbon. Remember from your biology class in high school or whatever, carbon is the building block of all life, right? And it cycles just like water does between the atmosphere and the soil and all the organisms that inhabit both. But the key interpoint between the land and the atmosphere happens through photosynthesis. So the plants are what manage the carbon dioxide levels in the soil and in the air. And they use the free energy from the sun to capture They pull carbon dioxide out of the air, release the oxygen, keep the carbon, and use it to make sugars. Some of the sugars go to the plant, but some of them go to the ground to feed the soil microbes, which build soil, which build fertility. All right, so carbon in the soil is generally measured as percentage of organic matter, which anybody who's gardened or farmed or whatever knows that that is where you get your fertility. That is what holds your moisture in the soil. It's crucial. Darren Doherty, who's a permaculturist in Australia, and I don't know where he's getting his data, but he said if we increased organic matter just 2% on all the world's soil, it would take us back to pre-industrial levels of carbon in the air in 10 years. And the cool thing is that, and I'll get to it, but scientists used to say it takes 100 years to build 1 inch of topsoil, but there are guys who are doing it in decades instead of hundreds of years, so that's good. Water cycle. You've all seen this old picture. The key thing to note here is how the carbon cycle, which is the plants and roots, catch water and manipulate the water cycle. Without that ground cover, the water just runs off, and there's nothing left to evaporate and keep rain coming down. Without those roots going into the ground, the water just runs off and doesn't refill your water table. All right, so this, I had to show this because it's so powerful to our everyday lives, but this is NRCS, which is a Natural Resource Conservation Service, and these are plots of ground. You see bare ground, you see crop stubble, you see forest oil, and what they do is they put 2 inches of rainfall in 10 minutes, so that's like a flood event, right? But pay attention to this. The back jars are the amount of water that infiltrates into the soil. The front jars are the amount of water that runs off. So look at your healthy pasture swirled on the far right. Look how much is in the ground, and look how much is run off, and look how clean it is. Your overgrazed soil, your tilled soil, your bare soil, look how much is in the ground, and look how much dirt and water has run off. So that is how you make deserts, that cumulative effect across a broad area. Think about what this means to a farmer of surviving a dry period, all right? If your soils are like this and you're able to hold that water, you don't need the rain as much. Think about that, what that means for continued flow of wells and water supply for our communities. In 2010, we had a 1,000-year flood in Nashville, and we got a bunch of rain. But think about if all the ground wasn't covered in concrete and the row crop fields had cover crops. Anyways, it wouldn't have been as bad if we had been managing the carbon cycle and had cover crops or controlled the water cycle through carbon. All right, community dynamics. That's how all the species interrelate to each other, and the big thing here is that the soil is more alive. The soil is alive. In one fingernail, there's 6 billion microbes. The thing that most people think is plants get their nutrients out of the roots, right? But they can't do it without the microbes. The plants give the microbes carbon, and the microbes mine nutrients from the soil and give it to the plants. So you got to take care of your soil critters. More life underground than over. In all farming, you're capturing solar energy and turning it into a usable product. So the healthier soil I have, the better grass I grow, the more cows I can run, the more money I'll have. Energy equals money. So how do you make this happen on a Middle Tennessee farm? This is the home farm. This is where I grew up, and all these red lines are fences that we have put in over the years. And there's no predators anymore, so that's what the farmer has to play that role, and he or she uses it with these fences. So we'll have all the livestock in one paddock at a time, and we'll further subdivide that with temporary electric fencing. So the animals only have access to half a day, 1 day, 3 days at a time, and they're all here. So what that means is you're getting that herd effect, the exercising of the soil while they're there, and the rest of the farm is getting rest. So the grasses can fully recover. And you rotate around and you manage through your grazing plan the timing of all that so that the grasses don't get overgrazed. So this is not actually my farm, but this is what it looked like when I was growing up. You see the grasses being constantly overgrazed, clipped. There's erosion, soil erosion, silting in of the water source. And that's pretty much what it looked like when I was growing up. And this is what it looks like now in the summertime or the spring. So hopefully you can see a difference. And that is by using the animals the way they're supposed to be used. So like in nature, there's not just one species. There's not on the grass you have a diversity of species, and you have a diversity of animals, and they all do their thing. So here we have cattle, sheep, goats, and chickens, and they aren't always all together, but sometimes they are. And the cattle and the sheep absorb some of each other's parasites, and the chickens put down manure that grows more grass for the cattle. So that's how we try to do it. That's some of that temporary fencing, just to show you how it works. And that's me getting a free lawn cutting up at the berry farm, which is my mother's family farm that we were able to start on last year. This is also at the berry farm. This is grass that's been allowed to fully recover. So those are happy cows. And you keep them in a mob like this, and in the case of the cattle, you use a reel of polywire. And it's like we're going back in time to mimic nature, but none of it's possible without this technology, all right? So we use the technology, we need the technology, but we have to apply it in the right ways. And it's hard to see, but this is this is that trample I'm talking about. You see how the grass is all smashed back into the ground where it's feeding the soil life, which is in turn feeding the grass. You can see the graze line right here. See how this is where they've grazed. I just pulled up my temporary line, and this is where they're moving to. This is a little overgrazed, but I just want to show you how much you can control your carbon cycle or your plants or whatever, or the damage you can do if you leave them there too long. And this was actually yesterday. I just threw it in there because this is what I get to work in every day. And the cattle and the sheep are all back at Glendale right now for the first part of the winter. And we don't use any chemicals, we don't use any chemical fertilizers, we feed relatively little hay compared to our conventional competitors. One of the few off-farm inputs we use is mineral, and in nature, livestock travel great distances to get to natural mineral licks, i.e. the French lick, which Nashville was founded on, right? So we bring in mineral, and this is sort of an experiment, and if you watch, when you put them in a new pasture, they'll go straight to whatever's best. Like, they're better eaters than we are. They'll pick out the species that has the most energy at that, during that season, or whatever nutrient they need. So sort of based on that principle, instead of a mineral mix, it's broken down into the individual elements, and they'll actually select for what they need based off what they're getting out of the soil. So the point of all that, food is the connection, modern man's connection to the soil. On a daily basis, most people don't interact with nature except for through the way they eat. And your food is only as good as the soil that it came from, as far as having nutrients and so on. There's two good analogies, I guess. One is in the taste, right? With everybody who drinks wine knows that their wine is only as good as the soil the grapes were grown in. And a visual one is if you've ever cracked a farm-raised egg versus a store egg and you saw how bright the yellow yolk was on a farm-raised egg, that's the difference. And it's the same in all your other foods. And so, by the way, when you're saving the environment and the world, you're producing a product that is healthier for people to eat. If you're interested in grass-fed meats, go to eatwild.com. And then we get the people back on the land. You reconnect the community with the world that sustains them. So this is what I see. I don't know, maybe it's the biggest threat in Middle Tennessee because we are in such a humid environment, but this is Cool Springs. And I used to make this drive to Nashville when I was a kid, and it was nothing but gorgeous farmland. And now, you hit Spring Hill and it's nothing but this. And you go down to Pulaski and the folks there are commuting that direction. It's Huntsville coming up the other way. So I guess my point is that in America, we've grown up with a culture that land is inexhaustible, and it's just not anymore. All right, so here we are, back to old Wendell after all that. I didn't get into farming knowing about all this stuff I've just gone through. I I just love the land, and I was hoping to figure out a way to make a living doing it. And I learned about all this, along the way. But the reason this idea, Savory's idea, is so great is in my life, it's the only win-win-win true triple bottom line I've ever come across. It's good for the environment, it's good for people, and it makes more money. And I think it has the potential to do all the things that I've talked about. And it actually has a chance of happening only because it makes more money. But while I'm talking about saving the world, I may as well indulge myself in a little dreaming. All right. So my hope is that if I can make it work, my neighbors will start to see the literal and figurative grass greener on the other side of the fence and wonder how they can do it too. Young people looking at career choices will see that farming is a profession that can in fact earn a professional wage and is deeply rewarding on many levels. An agricultural renaissance begins to take bloom in Murray County. The value of land kept open for farming or green space becomes competitive with that of development. Instead of talking about what the next industrial park will do for us or becoming Nashville's next bedroom, we'll talk about becoming Nashville's breadbasket. Local food scene will thrive. We'll have coffee shops in the downtown. We'll have small businesses springing up and people back on the land. But while we're talking about saving the world, I will ask you to dream with me a little bit. Imagine the perfect community where you would like to live, what it physically looks like, how much green space, and what the